The morning began like any other in the back country of the Ozarks, quiet and sharp with the taste of autumn. Mist clung to the hollows and ridgelines, softening the blaze of red maples and golden oaks. Mike Harlow rose before the sun, the way years of deployments had trained him, though there was no reveille, no commander's call. Just him, the trees, and Ranger, the old German shepherd who stirred at the faint scrape of boots on frost-tipped leaves. Mike's life had narrowed to essentials: coffee boiled over a tin kettle, a cot beneath a canvas tarp, a battered journal filled with half-finished thoughts he rarely shared with anyone. After 12 years in the Marines, after the desert tours and the endless echoes of gunfire in his head, he wanted quiet. He wanted the wilderness to wear down the jagged edges inside him. Most mornings, the routine worked. Most mornings, he could pretend the past was another man's life. But Ranger was restless that day. The dog paced near the tree line, hackles just slightly raised, nose tasting the wind. Mike noticed it in the way his gait shortened, the low rumble in his chest. That sound wasn't aggression, it was unease. Mike trusted that sound more than any compass. "What do you got, buddy?" he murmured, shouldering his small pack. Ranger's ears twitched at the tone, alert but steady. Then he trotted forward down a deer trail that sloped into a narrow ravine. The ravine was one Mike had passed before, nothing but tanglewood and erosion scars. Yet, overnight rains had cut deeper channels in the soil, exposing roots and rocks that had not seen daylight in decades. Ranger stopped where the bank had sheared away, paws clawing at something dull and gray beneath the mud. Mike dropped to one knee. What glimmered there was not stone. It was metal, cold, pitted, stubbornly solid. His gloved hand brushed away clay, revealing more. A flat surface, riveted seams, an edge too precise to be natural. He leaned back, studying it with the wariness of a man who had seen too many hidden explosives buried under sand. Whatever this was, it was built to last. The air smelled faintly metallic, acrid against the earthy scent of wet pine needles. He pulled the compact shovel from his pack, the same entrenching tool he'd carried through Helmand Province. The rhythm of digging was muscle memory: chop, scrape, scoop. Roots resisted like sinew, rocks bled sparks against steel. Each strike echoed in the ravine's silence. Ranger stayed close, eyes never leaving the widening patch of gray. After an hour, sweat trickled down Mike's spine despite the chill. The exposed section revealed a rectangular outline, thick plating, bolted edges. Not a tank, too small. Not farming equipment either. His breath slowed as realization formed. This was a door, a heavy one, built for containment. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. "What the hell are you?" Ranger whined, circling with his nose pressed low. The dog pawed at the seam, then backed off, tail stiff. Mike took that as confirmation. Whatever was locked behind that steel wasn't meant to be unearthed. Still, curiosity had always been a dangerous tether for him. He couldn't walk away. He jammed the crowbar deep into the gap, heaved until his shoulders burned. The metal groaned, a tortured screech rolling through the hollow like some long-buried beast. Birds exploded from the canopy, startled into the sky. Finally, with a jarring shudder, the seal broke. The door lurched inward a few inches, then stopped, wedged against whatever lay inside. A rush of air belched out foul, cloying, the reek of mildew and decay sealed for decades. Mike gagged, pulled his shirt over his mouth, forced the door wider. The hollow yawned open, a blackness dense enough to swallow light. Ranger growled low, not moving closer, ears flat. Mike switched on his LED flashlight and stepped across the threshold. The beam sliced through the dark, painting steel walls and a rust-eaten floor. His first thought? An armored vehicle, maybe a transport. The second thought hit harder: bodies. Two skeletons slumped in what had once been seats, uniforms eaten by mold, bones stark against shadows. Nearby, a shotgun lay orange with rust, empty casings scattered like abandoned coins. The vault had not been deserted peacefully. It was a coffin sealed with violence. Mike swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear mixing with old memories, patrols that ended in wreckage, ambushes no one survived. He forced himself forward, boots crunching on brittle debris. In the back of the compartment sat a safe, its door twisted and torn off. Whoever had broken in left nothing but chaos behind. Ranger's growl deepened, different now, focused. He nosed at the floor beneath the driver's seat, pawing furiously. Mike crouched, shining his light. There, wedged in the seam, was a small object. With his knife, he pried it loose. A Zippo lighter, silver tarnished, initials etched in elegant strokes TM. He turned it over in his palm, the weight heavier than it should have been. A personal item, dropped or left behind, carrying someone's mark. Then he noticed something else, half buried under debris. A compact plastic cassette, the kind that hadn't been used in decades. The label was smeared, unreadable. He held it up, hearing the faint rattle of tape inside. Cassette and lighter tokens of another life, another crime. For a long moment, he just stood there, flashlight beam shaking against corroded steel. This wasn't treasure. This was testimony. This was a story locked away by time, sealed because someone wanted it forgotten. The stench pressed against his lungs, the silence heavy. He backed out slowly, every step deliberate. Ranger followed, but not before giving one last glance into the darkness, a soft rumble vibrating in his chest. Outside, Mike pulled the door shut with a resonant clang. He covered the exposed seam with branches and loose brush, disguising it once more. His fingers trembled as he slipped the lighter and cassette into his jacket pocket. The air seemed sharper now, the forest less like sanctuary and more like a witness. On the hike back, Ranger stayed unusually close, brushing Mike's leg, as if tethering him to the present. The woods were quiet, but not peaceful. Every rustle of leaves felt like breath held too long. Every shadow looked watchful. By the time they reached the camp, twilight had bled into the hollows. Mike set the kettle on the fire, trying to steady his hands with routine, yet the weight in his pocket was impossible to ignore. He turned the Zippo in the firelight, tracing the letters again, T, M. Who was it? A victim? A killer? Both? His gaze fell to the cassette. A relic like that could hold anything: orders, confessions, static. He wondered if he even wanted to know, because once he pressed play, there would be no turning back. The silence of the forest demanded it. Keep the secret or risk everything by chasing it. Mike stared into the flames, the lighter cold in his hand. Ranger lay at his feet, ears twitching at every faint noise in the distance. Somewhere out there, someone knew this vault existed. Someone had left their mark behind. And if the past had been buried this long, how far would they go to keep it hidden? The night deepened, the fire hissed. Mike felt the question gnawing at him, heavier than the mountains around him. Who the hell was TM, and why did Ranger growl like the forest itself wanted him to stop? Morning bled into the ridges of the Ozarks in muted shades of pewter and gold. The mist lifted slowly, revealing a world that seemed too quiet, as though the forest itself had absorbed the secret Mike Harlow carried in his pocket. The Zippo lighter, initials etched sharp T, M, and the brittle cassette tape sat heavy against his chest. He had slept little, lying awake beside the smoldering coals of his fire, listening to Ranger shift and sigh in his sleep. The discovery gnawed at him like a burr under the skin. By mid-morning, he gave in. He packed his rucksack with the bare essentials, slung his rifle across his shoulder, and whistled for Ranger. The dog trotted forward, tail low but steady, ears pricked to every sound. They set off toward the nearest settlement, Red Hollow, a town so small it barely appeared on state maps. The road wound through valleys where barns sagged under the weight of years, through stretches of pasture where cattle grazed listlessly behind rusting barbed wire. After nearly an hour's drive, the forest gave way to a narrow main street lined with brick storefronts, a faded service station, and a diner whose neon sign buzzed with tired insistence. A courthouse sat at the far end, modest and stern, and across from it, a squat building with carved stone lintels, the county library. Mike parked his dusty pickup near the library. He hesitated for a moment, studying the scene. Red Hollow radiated a kind of stillness that wasn't the peace he found in the woods, but something heavier, more suspicious. Conversations seemed to halt when a stranger's tires crunched the gravel. He patted Ranger's neck before tying him to a post in the shade. Inside, the library smelled of floor polish and old paper. The air was cool, hushed. Behind the circulation desk sat a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, pinned in a bun and eyes sharp behind half-moon glasses. Her name tag read, M. Fields. "Help you with something?" she asked, her voice carrying the crispness of a teacher who tolerated no nonsense. "I hope so," Mike said, putting on the easy, measured tone he had once used in debriefings. "Name's Harlow. I'm curious about some history. Logging routes, old transport records, around the late 82nds maybe. You wouldn't happen to have newspapers on file, would you?" Her gaze lingered on him, assessing. At last she rose, her shoes clicking on the tile. "We keep microfilm in the back. Follow me." She led him to a dim alcove where a microfilm reader sat humming faintly, beige plastic worn smooth from decades of use. She placed 3 slim boxes on the table: Arkansas Gazette, Springfield Post, and local county bulletins, 1,985 through 1,990. "Rewind when you're finished." "Appreciate it," Mike said, The hours that followed blurred into the whir of spools, the flicker of headlines across glass, school board elections, farm auctions, the endless rhythm of small-town life. Then September 1987. His breath hitched as the bold letters resolved into view. Armored vehicle vanishes on rural route. He leaned closer. The article detailed how a Sterling security truck, carrying $5 million in cash, had disappeared without a trace. The 2 guards were named, their photos printed grainy and stiff. Families pleaded for answers. The last known contact had been a routine radio check near a town just miles from Red Hollow. For weeks afterward, the story dominated the paper's state police searching, roadblocks, speculation of hijacking or inside job. And then, as if by command, the coverage thinned. By December, only brief mentions remained. No suspects, no wreckage, no ransom demand, nothing. The case had gone cold with an unnatural speed. Mike scrolled through until his eyes ached. Each reel confirmed the same: silence swallowing outrage, a mystery erased by time. He packed the boxes, thanked Mrs. Fields with a nod. She gave him one last, searching look, as though gauging whether he had seen too much. Stepping into the noon light, Mike crossed to the diner. Its sign declared Earl's Place in peeling paint. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee. A row of old men in overalls lined the counter, murmuring about weather and cattle. Vinyl booths stretched along the windows. He slid into one. Ranger waited outside by the truck, visible through the glass, alert but calm. A burly man with a heavy mustache and a stained apron approached, pad in hand. The name tag said Earl. "What can I get you?" Earl asked. "Coffee. Slice of apple pie, if you've got it." "Always got pea." As Earl set down the steaming cup a few minutes later, Mike stirred the conversation casually. "I was at the library earlier, reading up on some old roots, some history. This county sure has seen its share of things." Earl gave a non-committal grunt. "Funny," Mike continued. "I came across a story. Back in '87, armored truck went missing. Big one, $5 million. Ever hear folks talk about it?" The effect was immediate. The hum of conversation at the counter faltered, then stilled. Forks hovered mid-air. One of the farmers cleared his throat and turned back to his plate. Earl's eyes hardened. "People mostly mind their own business around here," he said flatly. "Sure, I get that. Just seemed odd the case dried up so fast. 2 men vanish, all that money. You'd think it would be something folks remembered." Earl set the rag he'd been holding onto the counter with a heavy thud. He leaned in, voice low. "We don't talk about that." The words weren't a suggestion. They were an order. His gaze lingered, unblinking, until Mike gave a small nod. He ate the pie in silence, every sense sharpened. When he left cash on the table and stepped into the sunlight, the weight of eyes followed him. Ranger wagged his tail once, sensing his unease. Mike climbed into the truck, turned the ignition. As he pulled away from the diner, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Earl stood at the doorway, phone in hand, lips moving as he watched the truck roll out of sight. Mike's knuckles tightened on the wheel. Red Hollow wasn't just a quiet town. It was a fortress of silence, protecting something rotten. The 2 artifacts in his pocket felt heavier than ever. The lighter, marked with TM, the cassette whispering its secrets, and now a town that reacted like a hive when disturbed. He had confirmed what he already suspected. The armored truck in the ravine was the one from 1987, but instead of answers, he had drawn attention. Back at the diner, Earl hung up the receiver of the rotary phone, his face tight. His voice had been low, urgent. "Yeah, it's me. We've got a problem. Some outsiders asking about '87. The line clicked dead. Earl wiped his hands on his apron and looked out toward the road, where dust still hung in the air. Mike drove out of town, Ranger leaning against the passenger seat. The horizon stretched ahead, blue hills stacked against each other like sleeping giants, but he no longer felt alone in the wilderness. He felt watched. The cassette rattled faintly in his pocket with the movement of the truck. What did it contain? Whose voice might spill from those brittle reels of tape? And how many people in Red Hollow would kill to make sure he never found out? The road wound back toward the woods, shadows lengthening as the afternoon faded. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching at some distant sound only he could hear. Mike felt the hair on his own neck rise. He pressed harder on the gas. Somewhere behind him, a second set of headlights flickered on, following at a measured distance. The drive back from Red Hollow felt longer than it should have. The road twisted through valleys and ridges, but what pressed heavier on Mike Harlow was not the asphalt, it was the weight of silence that followed him. In the rearview mirror, that set of headlights had lingered far too long, keeping a steady distance. Eventually, when the forest thickened and the road narrowed, the lights vanished, as if whoever trailed him had decided their message was already clear. "We see you." Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the window, ears twitching at every sound in the trees. His body was tense, not relaxed the way it usually was during drives back to camp. Mike felt it too. The town had closed ranks against him, and now shadows pressed in on the life he thought was secluded, safe. He turned off the county road and followed the dirt track into the hollow where his camp lay hidden. The truck rattled over ruts, headlights sweeping over familiar oaks and undergrowth. But as soon as he stepped down onto the packed earth, he knew something was wrong. The air carried a different weight, charged, unsettled. Ranger growled low, his hackles up, as they walked toward the fire pit. Then Mike saw it. The small wooden table he had built from salvaged planks stood beside the tent. Its surface now bore a message more eloquent than words. A large hunting knife had been driven straight into the center of the wood, quivering slightly from the force. Mike froze. Every instinct sharpened, senses flaring, as though he were back on patrol overseas. This wasn't random vandalism. This was communication. Whoever had followed him from Red Hollow had come here. They had walked into his camp, close enough to touch the things he lived with daily, and they had left him a calling card. Ranger snarled, circling the table, nose pressed to the ground. Mike crouched, studying the blade. It wasn't some store-bought piece, it was custom, handle carved from antler, steel honed bright despite its utilitarian look. The kind of knife serious hunters favored, or men who wanted to remind you they could cut more than venison. He straightened slowly, eyes sweeping the perimeter. That's when he saw the boot prints in the soft soil near the fire pit. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller, both fresh. They had come in close, left their warning, and walked away, knowing he'd find it. The dog's presence likely kept them from doing worse. Mike exhaled through his nose, steadying his pulse. Fear was a luxury, action was necessity. He gave Ranger a calming pat, though the dog's muscles still quivered with tension. "Good boy," he whispered. "You did your job." The next hours were spent tearing down the illusion of comfort he had built. The canvas tent came down too obvious, too vulnerable. Instead, he erected a lean-to under dense brush, camouflaged with a tarp and branches. It was cramped, uncomfortable, but harder to spot from a distance. Then he worked the perimeter. Fishing lines stretched low between trees, tiny bells, and cans filled with pebbles tied at intervals. Primitive alarms, but reliable. He dug a small cache near the stream bed, burying essentials in a waterproof bag. Extra rations, first aid kit, spare GPS, and most importantly, the Zippo and cassette. If he had to flee, he wouldn't lose everything. The work was exhausting, but methodical. His body remembered how to do this, how to shape a defensive position out of whatever landscape offered. Ranger followed each step, sniffing the new lines, circling back to the table with the knife, as though unwilling to leave it unguarded. By dusk, the camp no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a forward operating base. Mike sat with his back against an oak, rifle cleaned and loaded across his lap. Ranger lay at his feet, not sleeping, ears flicking with every sound. The silence of the woods returned, but it wasn't the old silence of peace. It was watchful, predatory. Darkness fell, and with it came memory. The knife gleamed faintly in his mind, a reminder that enemies had crossed into his sanctuary. He dozed lightly, every crack of twig pulling him half awake. Ranger shifted once, letting out a warning rumble that faded when the night passed without further intrusion. By dawn, Mike knew this couldn't continue. He couldn't sit waiting for another message or worse. He needed answers. The initials on the lighter, the cassette, the bodies in that steel tomb. They were pieces of a puzzle that someone wanted buried. And if someone wanted it hidden badly enough to walk into his camp, then the truth was more dangerous than he had imagined. He poured coffee into his battered tin mug, staring into the embers. Ranger lifted his head, watching him with steady eyes. Mike spoke quietly, as though voicing the decision out loud would solidify it. "We can't stay on defense. Not anymore. We dig deeper. We find who TM is, and then we find out why 2 men died locked inside that truck." Ranger gave a low huff, as if in agreement, then trotted toward the trail. The morning sun filtered through the canopy, painting the ground in shards of gold. Mike slung his pack, checked the crowbar, still strapped to his truck, and whistled softly. Together, man and dog set out once more. Back at the fire pit, the knife still jutted from the wooden table, gleaming faintly in the light. Mike left it there. Some warnings didn't need to be erased. Some warnings needed to be remembered. They followed the deer trail back toward the ravine. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Mike's jaw tightened as the memory of opening that rusted door returned the stench. the bones, the hollow silence. But there was more there. Something he hadn't uncovered yet. He could feel it like a second heartbeat under the ground. He reached the ravine by late morning. Ranger circled the perimeter, alert as ever, while Mike brushed away the camouflage he had left. The metal surface of the door gleamed dully beneath the mud. He gripped the handle, felt the cold steel bite into his palm, and pulled. The vault yawned open again, shadows curling inside like smoke. Mike stepped across the threshold, flashlight cutting through the gloom. The skeletons hadn't moved, but the sight of them gnawed more fiercely, now that he knew how quickly Red Hollow shut its mouth at the mention of 1,987. He crouched by the seat where Ranger had sniffed before. The lighter had been there. What else might have been overlooked? He scanned the seams, the floor, the jagged edge of the ruined safe. That was when his beam caught a corner of something beneath a sheet of corroded metal. He pried carefully with his knife, and the fragment gave way, revealing a thin compartment welded to the floor. Inside lay nothing but dust and a small, brittle scrap of paper sealed in plastic. He eased it out, heart thumping. The ink was faded, nearly illegible, but he could make out enough. A date, the 26th of September, 1987, and 2 words scrawled in block letters, TM, approved. The initials again. Not just on the lighter, not just a coincidence. This was deliberate, a mark of ownership or command. Ranger whined sharply, jerking his head toward the entrance. Mike killed the flashlight, heart hammering. He pressed against the steel wall, listening. The faint crunch of leaves carried down into the ravine. Footsteps. Deliberate. Slow. Someone was out there. He tightened his grip on the knife, every sense burning awake. Whoever had left the blade in his camp was back. And this time, they weren't leaving a message. The footsteps outside the ravine slowed, then stopped. Mike froze in the darkness of the steel tomb, back pressed against cold walls, knife in hand. Ranger's body stiffened, a low growl rising from his chest like a warning siren muffled in fur. The sound of boots on loose gravel shifted again, closer this time, pausing just beyond the door. Mike exhaled quietly through his nose. He had spent enough years listening for ambushes to know the rhythm of a cautious stalker. Whoever it was didn't blunder. They were deliberate, patient, the kind who came not to stumble upon secrets but to guard them. Then, without warning, the sound retreated 2 slow steps. A faint scrape, then silence. The forest swallowed the intruder whole. Ranger crept forward, nose at the door, but no more sound followed. Whoever had come was gone. Mike waited a full 5 minutes before he moved again. Only when the quiet became unbearable did he switch his flashlight back on and glance down at the brittle scrap of paper he'd uncovered. TM, approved. 3 letters that now carried the weight of menace. He slipped it into his jacket beside the lighter and cassette. Together, the artifacts painted a picture someone named TM had not only touched that vault but had claimed it, and Red Hollow had buried the truth ever since. By late afternoon, Mike and Ranger retreated to a narrow cave they'd used before as shelter. The entrance was hidden by hanging vines, the interior dry and cool. Ranger settled near the mouth, ears tuned to every sound, while Mike lit a small lantern and sat cross-legged on the stone floor. He pulled the cassette from his pocket and stared at it. The casing was yellowed, the tape reels stiff with age. He dug into his rucksack until he found the battered Walkman he kept mostly for shortwave signals. He hadn't used it in years, but he had kept a set of AA batteries wrapped in plastic. The machine clicked alive with a faint hiss of static when he pressed play. At first, there was only distortion, the crackle of age and silence. Then voices emerged, muffled but distinct. "Tom, if this goes wrong, shut up, stick to the plan. Drive to marker 22, pull off the route. We'll have the decoy car staged. By the time anyone knows, we'll be gone." The blood drained from Mike's face. That voice, the second one, was clear enough. Firm, commanding, carrying the cadence of authority. It was McAllister. Sheriff Thomas McAllister, the same man whose photo still hung in the courthouse, smiling from the late 1982 as a deputy, praised for exemplary service. Mike rewound, listening again, heart thudding louder with each word. The initials T.M., the lighter, the note they weren't coincidences. McAllister hadn't just investigated the armored truck robbery, he had orchestrated it. Ranger shifted, ears flicking. The dog growled softly, as if even he recognized the danger in the voice. Mike set the Walkman down, rubbing his temples. He needed corroboration. His word alone meant nothing, especially not in a town where the diner owner could pick up a phone and summon shadows. He needed to make the evidence undeniable. That night, under the cover of darkness, he assembled the small satellite modem he kept for emergencies. It took time to align the dish, to coax the green light of connection from the cold sky. When the link stabilized, he opened his encrypted messenger and typed a name he hadn't used in years: Ryan Cooper. Ryan had been with him in Helmand, pinned down in a valley when the world seemed to fall apart. Mike had dragged him out under fire, a bond forged in blood and silence. Ryan was FBI now, Chicago field office. If anyone would listen, it was him. Mike typed quickly, fingers steady despite the storm in his chest. He outlined the discovery, the armored vehicle in the ravine, the skeletons, the Zippo lighter engraved with TM, the note, the cassette. He attached photos taken on his digital camera, each one dated and geotagged. He ended the message with one final line: "I believe Thomas McAllister, former deputy sheriff, orchestrated the 1,987 sterling security heist. He is alive, wealthy, and dangerous. I am compromised. Need guidance." He hit send. The message vanished into the ether. For a long while, he sat in the cave, staring at the blank screen, listening to the forest breathe. Ranger dozed lightly, but never fully relaxed, his nose twitching as if tracking unseen currents. When the reply finally came, it was short. Received. Sit tight. Packaging intel to Little Rock SAC. Verification will take 24-48 hours. Can you hold position? Mike exhaled, a bitter smile curling his lips. Hold position. As though he were still a soldier, crouched behind sandbags waiting for orders. But he knew better. Time was a luxury he didn't have. He typed back, "I'll try, but they already know I'm here. Waiting won't keep me alive." There was no reply. The line went silent. Mike leaned back against the stone, closing his eyes. For the first time in years, the war zone edge was back in his veins. Hypervigilance, the twitch of muscles ready to spring. He didn't need to imagine the enemy anymore. The enemy was flesh and blood, living just down the road in Red Hollow, carrying the face of respectability. The next morning, Mike woke before dawn, the decision already carved into him. Waiting for the FBI was no plan at all. He needed leverage, something that would force McAllister to expose himself. He remembered the young journalist someone had mentioned in town months ago, a blogger who ran the Ozarks Expose, an independent site known for digging up uncomfortable truths about local corruption. If anyone could throw a wrench into McAllister's fortress of silence, it was her. Mike created an anonymous email account through the secure network. He typed a message simple and sharp. Ask Thomas McAllister what he dropped in the woods back in 1987. He attached 2 files, a photograph of the Zippo lighter, the initials TM, glinting under his flashlight, and a short audio clip from the cassette where McAllister's voice barked, "Shut up. Stick to the plan." He hit send, then destroyed the account. The message was out. Ranger padded to his side, leaning against him as though to remind him that he wasn't alone. Mike scratched behind the dog's ears, staring out of the cave at the thin light spreading across the forest. The day stretched on with a taut quiet. He checked his perimeter, refilled his water, forced down rations, but the air felt charged, waiting. Late in the afternoon, he scrolled through headlines on his tablet, and there it was. Exclusive. New evidence links prominent businessman Thomas McAllister to 1,987 sterling heist. The Ozarks Expose had run it, full images and audio included. Mike sat back, a grim satisfaction stirring in his chest. The trap had been sprung. McAllister could no longer hide behind silence. He would have to respond. But satisfaction quickly soured to unease, because men like McAllister didn't sue for libel, didn't send lawyers, they sent soldiers. As night fell, Ranger became restless, pacing near the cave entrance, ears pricked. Mike packed his rifle, tightened the straps on his boots, and whispered, "They'll come now, boy. Not just whispers, not just knives and tables. They'll come for us." Ranger growled, low and steady, the sound echoing against stone. Miles away, in a house that glowed with the warm light of power and wealth, Thomas McAllister slammed his fist against a desk as the headline lit his screen. His empire, his silence, cracked wide open by a single outsider. He barked orders into the phone, his voice ragged with rage. By the time Mike banked the fire low, he knew the war had shifted. The hunter was now the hunted, but he was ready. The first rumble of engines reached the hollow just past midnight. Engines rumbled through the night, low and heavy, their growl rolling across the hollow like distant thunder. Mike crouched at the mouth of the cave, rifle steady in his hands, Ranger tense beside him. The headlights appeared, first twin beams slicing through the trees, searching, probing. Then, the dark shapes of two SUVs crept along the dirt track, their engines cutting as they stopped just shy of the ravine. Doors opened with a metallic thud. 3 men emerged. Mike recognized 2 from the diner, the hulking driver with the shaved head and the bearded one he'd glimpsed in his mirror. The third man carried himself differently, deliberate and calculating. His coat glinted faintly in the light. Even in the half-dark, Mike knew. McAllister, the sheriff-turned-tycoon, stood at the edge of the trees, eyes scanning the hollow with cold fury. His empire, his silence, had been pierced, and now he came to seal it with violence. Mike's breath slowed. Years of training clicked into place. This was no longer about mystery, it was survival. He touched Ranger's shoulder lightly. "Stay close, boy. We move together." The men began their descent toward the ravine, flashlights cutting through brush. Mike waited until they were almost at the edge before he acted. He slipped deeper into the woods, moving silently, Ranger at his side. The objective wasn't to fight here. It was to draw them in, to fracture their lines, to make them hunt him on his ground. Branches whipped past as he pushed through the undergrowth. He could hear them behind boots crunching, voices barking orders. "Spread out! Find him!" McAllister's voice cracked like a whip. Mike ducked behind a fallen log, signaling Ranger low with a hand. The dog melted into shadow, eyes gleaming faintly. The first pursuer, the bearded man, moved ahead, his rifle sweeping in jerks. Too loud, too impatient. Mike let him pass within 10 feet before rising from the shadows. A swift strike of the rifle, butt to the back of the man's head, sent him sprawling unconscious into the leaves. Ranger circled once, teeth bared, guarding the flank. 1 down, but the driver was smarter. His flashlight cut arcs across the brush, searching for movement. "Miller, you good?" he hissed. No answer came. His pace quickened. Mike motioned with 2 fingers. Ranger darted left, circling wide. A rustle snapped the driver's head around, just as Ranger burst from the brush, snarling. The man panicked, firing wild shots that shattered branches. Mike tackled him low, wrenching the rifle away before slamming him into the ground. Ranger stood over him, teeth at his throat until the man froze. 2 down. Now only McAllister remained, but his voice cut through the dark, steady and furious. "Harlow, you think you can play soldier in my woods? You think anyone's gonna believe your story over mine? You'll vanish just like that truck, just like those guards." Mike rose slowly from the undergrowth, rifle aimed. "Funny thing about the truth, Tom," he called back. "It doesn't stay buried forever." For a moment, silence held. Then a pistol cracked, the bullet whining past Mike's ear. He dove for cover as McAllister advanced, firing methodically. The old sheriff wasn't reckless. He was skilled, trained long before he wore a badge. The forest erupted in chaos. Gunfire barked, echoing through the hollow. Mike returned fire, not to kill, but to push him back. Ranger darted through shadows, drawing McAllister's aim off balance. But McAllister pressed forward, rage lending him speed. "You should have stayed in your cave, Harlow. Nobody asked you to dig up ghosts." Mike shifted position, flanking. He knew he couldn't hold this fight forever. McAllister had resources, men, reach. This was only the opening round. At last, headlights flashed through the trees again, another set of vehicles approaching. Reinforcements. Too many. Mike whistled sharp. Ranger bounded to his side. Together they sprinted into the deeper woods, weaving through black trunks and tangles of brush. Behind them, McAllister's voice roared with fury, but he didn't give chase. Not yet. Mike and Ranger didn't stop until their lungs burned. They collapsed near a stream, the water reflecting slivers of moonlight. Mike splashed his face, heart pounding. Ranger drank, then stood guard, body taut as a bowstring. He knew now McAllister wouldn't retreat. The trap had been sprung, and the man who once wore a badge was now a cornered predator. Mike checked the time. The FBI's promised response was still a day away, maybe longer. He couldn't wait. He needed to keep moving, stay ahead, use the terrain as his shield. And yet, the weight of the artifacts in his pack reminded him this wasn't just about survival. It was about exposing the truth, about giving voice to the dead men in that vault. The night grew colder. Mike leaned against a boulder. Ranger pressed close for warmth. He whispered softly, "They'll come harder tomorrow. But we'll be ready." Ranger gave a low rumble, eyes fixed on the darkness. Somewhere far off, an owl called. And closer still, hidden in the blackness, another sound rose, the unmistakable snap of a twig under heavy boots. Mike's hand tightened on his rifle. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The twig snapped again, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the hush of the stream. Mike froze, rifle already raised, Ranger stiff at his side, hackles standing like wire. The night pressed in around them, every shadow thick with menace. He shifted his weight, eyes scanning the tree line. A voice called softly from the dark. "Easy, Harlow, don't shoot." Mike's finger tensed on the trigger. Then a figure emerged from behind a cluster of oaks, hands held open. It wasn't one of McAllister's men. It was a woman, young, no more than 30, bundled in a worn jacket, a messenger bag slung across her shoulder. Her dark hair was tied back, her boots muddied from the trail. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered urgently. "Name's Claire Jennings. I run the Ozark expose." Mike didn't lower the rifle, but his pulse shifted from threat to wary confusion. "You published the story." She nodded quickly. "And that's why I'm here. After it went live, I started getting messages. Anonymous tips, old files, people who've been sitting on pieces of this puzzle for decades. I couldn't come to you in town, too many eyes, so I followed." Ranger eased slightly, though his gaze never left her. Mike gestured with the barrel. "Talk." Claire crouched near the stream, pulling a folder from her bag. She handed it over, her voice low but fierce. "McAllister's not just a dirty cop who turned into a land baron. He built everything on blood money. My sources say half the county's land deals trace back to shell companies tied to him. And this," she tapped the folder. "This is a copy of a deposition that never made it to trial. A former deputy swore he saw McAllister near the transport route the night the truck disappeared. He died in a car accident 3 days later." Mike thumbed through the pages, the flashlight beam cutting across faded signatures. Every line screamed, "Cover up." Claire leaned closer. "People have been terrified for years. Anyone who asked questions was shut down, bought off, or buried. But with your photos, your evidence, they're scared, but they're talking again. You've cracked the silence." The words struck him harder than gunfire. He wasn't just dragging his own demons into light. He'd opened a vein in the whole county. Still, suspicion lingered. "Why come to me? Why risk stepping into these woods?" "Because you're the only one standing up to him," she said simply. "And because I think he's coming after you harder than ever. I can help. I've got contacts, a safe house, but you've got the artifacts. Together, maybe we can keep them alive long enough to matter." Mike studied her in silence. Ranger sniffed the air around her, then sat down, his quiet approval stronger than words. Finally, Mike lowered the rifle. "All right," he said. "But understand this, you stick close, you follow orders. Out here, hesitation gets you killed." "I understand," she said, her jaw set. They moved before dawn, slipping deeper into the woods. Claire walked light for someone untrained, her determination carrying her where instinct failed. Ranger kept point, his presence a shield. By mid-morning, they returned to the ravine. The vault waited like a wound in the earth, its rusted door yawning in silence. Mike led them inside, flashlight beam steady. The skeletons still sat in their steel chairs, mute witnesses to betrayal. Claire's breath caught at the sight, but she didn't flinch. "God," she whispered. "They left them here." Mike crouched near the hidden compartment where he'd found the bundles of cash. He pulled out one brick, still sealed in brittle plastic. He handed it to Claire. Proof. Enough to put McAllister on the defensive. She held it as though it were both holy and cursed. "This could burn him down, or get us killed before it ever sees a courtroom," Mike said. Ranger pawed suddenly at the floor again, nose pressing to a seam near the back wall. Mike knelt, prying at the rusted edges until a smaller panel gave way. Inside lay a metal lockbox, badly corroded but intact. With effort, he forced it open. Inside were papers, sealed envelopes, and a reel of 16mm film. Claire gasped softly. "This is it. The missing link. They didn't just steal money, they documented something. A meeting, maybe? A handoff?" Mike turned one envelope over. Stamped in faded ink was a single name, McAllister. He slid the whole box into his pack. The weight was immense, not just in pounds, but in consequence. They sealed the vault again, camouflaging it with brush. As they worked, Ranger's growl rippled low, his body stiffening. Mike followed his gaze up the ridge. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the tree line, watching, motionless. Then another joined, and another. Mike's gut clenched. McAllister's reinforcements. They had been shadowing them, waiting for the right moment. "Time to move," Mike hissed. They bolted into the forest, ducking branches, feet pounding the earth. Bullets cracked through the trees, splintering bark. Claire stumbled, but Mike yanked her upright, Ranger snapping at her heels to drive her forward. They broke into a clearing, lungs burning. Ahead, a narrow gorge split the land, a fallen log bridging the gap. Mike urged Claire across first, Ranger leaping after her. He followed last, gunfire echoing behind. The log shuddered under the impact of a bullet, but held. They vanished into the opposite tree line, leaving shouts behind them. They didn't stop until the forest grew silent again. Claire bent double, gasping. They won't stop. He won't stop. Mike scanned the ridges, every nerve alive. No. But now we've got something he can't bury, and that means he'll come himself. He looked down at Ranger, whose tongue lolled but whose eyes burned bright, then back at Claire, clutching the sealed cache and the lockbox like lifelines. The war wasn't over. It was only escalating. As twilight fell, Mike set camp in another hollow, carefully concealed. Claire sat close to the fire's glow, her face pale but resolute. She whispered, almost to herself, "If we make it out of this, people will finally know. The truth will finally live." Mike didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the ridge above, where he thought he saw movement again, silent shapes slipping between trees, shadows that refused to leave. And somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, a single wolf howl carried through the Ozarks night. The hollow was cloaked in a velvet darkness, the kind that seemed to thicken with every passing hour. The small fire Mike allowed was buried deep in a ring of stones, more ember than flame. Claire sat close, hugging her knees, her eyes reflecting the faint glow. Ranger lay stretched on the dirt, chest rising and falling, but every so often his ears flicked, head lifting at sounds only he could hear. Mike hadn't spoken in hours. His hands worked steadily, checking his rifle, tightening straps on his pack, sharpening the field knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Claire finally broke the silence. "You think he'll come tonight?" Mike didn't look up. "He'll come when he thinks I'm tired enough to stop watching. That's when men like him strike." The night answered with a chorus of cicadas and the occasional cry of an owl. Then, faintly, a twig snapped. Ranger's head shot up, a growl vibrating low in his chest. Mike motioned to Claire, "Douse the ember. Now." She kicked dirt over the coals, plunging them into a deeper dark. The world narrowed to sound and shadow. Another twig cracked, closer this time. Voices drifted through the trees, hushed but urgent. Mike recognized the Cadence McAllister's men, sweeping the woods. They weren't searching blindly, they knew exactly where to look. Mike pulled Claire close, whispering in her ear, "Stay behind me, no matter what." Ranger pressed forward, nose high, body taut. The dog's instincts were a compass, pointing straight toward the encroaching threat. Flashlight beams pierced the trees, slicing the night into shards of pale light. Mike and Claire ducked low behind a fallen oak as two men stepped into the clearing. One carried a shotgun, the other a scoped rifle. Their beams swept across the brush, missing the fugitives by inches. "Spread out," one hissed. "He's here somewhere." Mike's grip tightened on his rifle. He could drop them both, but the gunfire would draw McAllister and the rest straight to their position. He needed something else. He glanced at Ranger, then tapped twice on the ground. The dog understood. He slid into the shadows, moving low and silent. Seconds later, a rustle snapped behind the gunman. Both whirled, flashlights cutting the dark. In that instant, Mike rose and pressed the rifle's butt hard into the first man's jaw, dropping him like a felled tree. Claire gasped, but stifled it with her hand. The second man swung his rifle, but Ranger lunged from the dark, teeth locking around his arm. The man screamed, firing into the air as the weapon clattered to the ground. Mike finished it with a sharp strike, and silence rushed back into the woods. Claire trembled. "You could have killed them." Mike shook his head. "Dead men don't talk, but unconscious ones slow the others down." He bound the two with their own belts, gagging them with strips of cloth. Then he pulled Claire and Ranger deeper into the hollow, away from the clearing. But the forest wouldn't release them easily. More lights appeared at the ridge, voices shouting, and then another sound, a slow clap, deliberate, mocking. Thomas McAllister stepped into view, flanked by two more men. He wasn't in uniform, but the authority clung to him like smoke. His pistol gleamed in his hand, steady and confident. "Well done, soldier," he called out. "You still move like you're in the desert, but this isn't Fallujah. These are my woods, my men, my rules." Mike stepped from cover, rifle aimed. "Your rules ended when you left those men to rot in that steel coffin." McAllister's smile was thin and cruel. "You think you're some kind of avenger? You're nothing. A ghost-playing hero with a dog at his side." He raised his pistol, aiming squarely at Mike. "This ends tonight." Before he could fire, Ranger leapt from the shadows, forcing one of McAllister's men into chaos. Gunfire cracked, bullets sparking off rocks. Mike dropped low, returning fire in controlled bursts. Claire scrambled for cover, clutching the lockbox to her chest. The firefight roared, echoing through the hills. McAllister barked orders, his men pressing hard. But Mike fought like a man who had lived this before. every movement efficient, every shot precise. Ranger wove through shadows, striking and vanishing, a phantom with teeth. At last, silence fell again. Two of McAllister's men lay groaning on the ground. Ranger returned to Mike's side, blood streaking his fur, but eyes burning fierce. McAllister alone remained standing, pistol raised, face twisted with rage. He stepped closer, voice raw. "You don't understand, Harlow. Everything in this county, every deal, every farm, every life, runs because of me. You pull this thread, it all collapses. You think anyone wants that? You think the FBI cares? They'll bury it just like they buried those guards." Mike's voice was steel. Not this time. He squeezed the trigger, firing a warning shot that shattered a branch inches from McAllister's head. For the first time, the old sheriff flinched. But before Mike could close in, headlights flared through the trees again. More vehicles, reinforcements, too many. McAllister grinned through the sweat and blood on his face. "You see? You can't stop it. You can't stop me." Mike grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her back into the shadows. Ranger limped but kept pace. They retreated deeper into the forest as McAllister's reinforcements swarmed the clearing. Voices shouted, flashlights tore through the night, and the chase ignited once more. They ran until their lungs burned, until the forest blurred into endless black. Only when they collapsed in a thicket, hidden from sight, did they pause. Ranger pressed close to Mike, blood warm against his sleeve. Claire clutched the lockbox like it was her heart. Mike stared at the distant glow of flashlights moving like fireflies across the ridge. His jaw clenched. "He's not just trying to kill us. He's trying to erase the past before the truth reaches daylight," Claire whispered. "Then we have to get there first." Mike nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "Then tomorrow, we stop running." But the forest wasn't done with them. From somewhere close, far too close, the snap of a camera shutter broke the silence. Not McAllister's men this time. Someone else was out there, documenting everything. The snap of the camera shutter lingered in the night air like a second heartbeat. Mike whipped his rifle toward the sound, Ranger bristling despite the blood on his flank. Claire clutched the lockbox tighter, her breath shallow. Another snap closer this time. Whoever was out there wanted to be heard. A figure emerged slowly from the trees. Not one of McAllister's men, this one moved carefully, almost nervously, holding the camera up as though it were a shield. The man was wiry, mid-40s, with a beard trimmed rough and clothes worn thin. "Don't shoot," he said, voice shaky. "Name's Daniel Price. I've been watching McAllister for years." Mike kept the rifle raised. "Watching?" Price nodded, swallowing hard. "I was a rookie reporter in '87. I started digging after the truck vanished. They warned me off, wrecked my car, broke my ribs. I left town, but I never stopped watching. When your story hit the expose, I knew you'd flushed him out. I've been documenting his men moving in the woods all night." He held the camera up. "Everything's here, photos, video, proof he can't erase." Claire's eyes widened. You could testify." Price shook his head. "I'm not brave like you two. But I can hand this over. It's time someone else carried the weight." Mike lowered the rifle slowly. Ranger sniffed the newcomer once, then sat back, tail thumping faintly. That was enough for Mike. He nodded. "Then we move together. Dawn's coming. We end this." They marched through the night, skirting ridges and creeks, until the first light of morning broke across the Ozarks. Mist clung low, wrapping the land in ghostly veils. The courthouse of Red Hollow rose in the distance, its brick facade glowing faintly in the sunrise. Mike stopped, scanning the streets. It was too quiet, too expectant. "He's waiting," he murmured. Claire looked at him, her face pale but resolute. "Then let's not keep him waiting." They crossed the empty square, Ranger limping but unyielding at Mike's side. Price trailed, camera pressed tight against his chest. At the courthouse steps, the heavy oak doors creaked open. McAllister stood there, flanked by deputies in crisp uniforms. His coat was gone. He wore a suit now, every inch the polished statesman. He spread his arms, smiling coldly. "Mr. Harlow, Miss Jennings, and a ghost from the past. I admire your persistence." His gaze slid to the lockbox in Claire's hands. "You think trinkets and old tape will undo me? You don't understand. This county breathes because I let it. Without me, it drowns." Mike stepped forward, voice hard. "You built an empire on bones, on silence. That ends today." McAllister's smile faded. He motioned, and the deputies raised their rifles. "You won't walk out of here alive." Before the standoff could ignite, sirens wailed from the edge of town. Black SUVs rolled in, not McAllister's this time, but federal. FBI agents in tactical gear spilled onto the square, weapons drawn, voices booming. "Drop your weapons, hands in the air." Chaos erupted. Deputies faltered, some lowering rifles, others shouting in panic. McAllister's face twisted with rage as Agent Ryan Cooper himself strode forward, badge raised. "Thomas McAllister, you're under arrest for armed robbery, conspiracy, and the murder of federal employees." The square exploded with movement. McAllister drew his pistol, firing wildly. Mike dove, pulling Claire down, Ranger snarling as bullets shattered stone. FBI agents returned fire, pinning McAllister behind the courthouse column. Then silence broken only by McAllister's ragged breathing. He stumbled into view, pistol shaking in his hand, eyes burning. "You think this is justice?" he spat. "This county is mine. It dies with me." Mike rose slowly, rifle aimed. "No, it lives without you." McAllister lunged, raising his gun toward Claire. Ranger launched first, a gray blur slamming into the man's arm. The shot went wide, echoing into the square. Agent surged forward, tackling McAllister to the ground, wrenching the pistol free. He thrashed, cursing, until cuffs snapped around his wrists. For the first time in decades, Thomas McAllister was powerless. The aftermath blurred. Agents swarmed, deputies disarmed, Price handing over his camera with trembling hands. Claire passed the lockbox to Ryan, her fingers finally loosening from its weight. Ranger pressed against Mike's leg, bleeding but alive, eyes fixed on his partner. Ryan clapped Mike's shoulder. "You did good, brother. You dragged the truth into daylight." Mike only nodded, exhaustion washing over him. He looked around the square, at the townsfolk peering from windows, their silence cracked open at last. The weight he had carried since that first rusted door gave way, replaced not by triumph, but by a weary kind of peace. By afternoon, McAllister was gone, loaded into a federal transport. The town stirred uneasily, as though waking from a long nightmare. Mike, Claire, Price, and Ranger stood at the edge of the square, the courthouse behind them. Claire smiled faintly. "It's over." Mike glanced down at Ranger, then back at the town. "Maybe." As dusk fell, they returned to the woods. Mike set a small fire, Ranger curled beside him. Claire wrote notes furiously. Price developing photos in a makeshift darkroom tent. For a moment, it felt safe. But safety was fragile. Mike pulled the battered Walkman from his pack, sliding the cassette in one last time. Static hissed. Then the voices returned. McAllister's orders. The plan. The betrayal. But then, at the very end, something new, words he hadn't heard before. "Deliver to TM in Springfield. He'll handle the rest." Mike's blood ran cold. McAllister wasn't the top. There was someone above him, someone whose initials had haunted the evidence from the start. He looked out into the darkening woods, heart heavy. The battle was over, but the war was not. And somewhere far beyond the trees, perhaps in a city office or a mansion study, TM was still waiting.